in Krishna consciousness in general, we have principles which are found within our philosophy. One should accept a spiritual master, Krishna is God. One should be sense-controlled. One should spread Krishna consciousness. One should be Krishna conscious. One is part and parcel of Krishna. These are all philosophical principles, and these are eternal principles. There's never a time when these will not be true. But you also have details, and details is how you apply the principle. So we'll say the principle is the whole world should be Krishna conscious. In India, traditionally, for the most part, women didn't live in ashrams, so that's a detail. When Prabhupada came to the West, he allowed women to live in ashrams. So the principle is that everyone should be Krishna conscious. The detail was, in certain situations, it's better for everyone's Krishna consciousness if the women don't live in an ashram, and in the situation in America, if the women didn't live in an ashram, being new to Krishna consciousness, they would have found it difficult or impossible to be Krishna conscious. So Prabhupada changed that detail. Another principle, you could say that Prabhupada changed. He engaged women in very actively preaching, because the culture in America was different, but the principle is that we should spread Krishna consciousness. And so he engaged women in doing things that in India women may not have done, or not many women have done. You get the idea. So there's a teaching, everyone should be Krishna conscious, we should make the world Krishna conscious, but the details will differ according to the culture. And Prabhupada married his disciples, and he said sannyasis should not marry their disciples. It's not the business of a sannyasi, but he saw that the men and women were mingling, and that is the American culture, and therefore he decided to marry them. And he also made sannyasis of very young men because he needed generals in the preaching army. Generally, you make sannyasis of men who are retired from family life. So these are details. So the principle is spread Krishna consciousness, then the details change, and the changing details doesn't change the principle. And you have to understand the difference between a philosophical principle that never changes and details that might change according to situation. It's not always easy to understand that, but we have to try to understand it so we don't consider that the detail is the principle or the principle is the detail. So if we think the detail is the principle, then we become inflexible. We spread Krishna consciousness. You can spread Krishna consciousness in Western dress, or you can spread it in Vaishnava dress. You can spread it, give a lecture standing up, give a lecture sitting down. You can sit on a big seat and wear a flower garland. You can sit in a chair. Don't wear a flower garland. You see what I'm saying. You can make prasadam hot and spicy. You can make it simple, according to what's necessary. But the detail is the principle is give Krishna consciousness, distribute prasadam. And then you can say, if you don't know how to apply the details, it means you haven't understood the principle. Okay. So now, how does this relate to culture? Because that's the topic of this discussion. So, culture means you have a philosophy, and then you align the lifestyle with the philosophy. So, in a sense, you could understand a person's philosophy through their lifestyle. What they believe, you could understand through their lifestyle. So, culture is the way you think, culture is the way you live. Now, let me read here. Looked at it in this way, behind every rule there is a principle, or a philosophical point that is being established. So the rule ensures that the right mentality is being attained. Following the rule for the sake of the rule is not the goal. So where do rules come in terms of culture? So we said culture is a way of thinking and living. But what if you don't naturally think and live in a way which is aligned with the philosophy? Okay, here's the philosophy. The philosophy says, I should be pure, I should treat people with compassion, empathy, kindness, I should serve them, I should not be envious, I should not be jealous. That's what the philosophy teaches. But what if I don't naturally do that? Can you hear the birds in the back? Listen closely, you can hear birds. Mayapur birds. So why do we need rules? Rules ensure that we live the philosophy. Rules establish the culture. Okay, you should do this and you shouldn't do that. Why? Because the philosophy says we should act in a certain way. So then now I have a rule which ensures I act in a certain way, and that rule then establishes the culture. So then the philosophy transitions into a lifestyle or practice because of the rule. So rules are necessary, but the rules have a purpose. That's the point. And the point is not just to follow a rule. Okay, let's read on. In pure Krishna consciousness, everyone performs their activities out of love for Krishna. And they will follow a particular way of dealing, a particular culture that fits their rasa or their relationship. So, what's being said here is like, for example, gopis have a particular relationship with Krishna. It's different than Mother Yasoda's relationship, and it's different than the cowherd boy's relationship, and it's different than the servant's relationship. And because it's spontaneous and natural, even without the rules, they'll naturally follow the nature of that relationship. So the cowherd boys will play with Krishna, they'll joke, they'll wrestle. Yasoda doesn't wrestle with Krishna, the gopis don't wrestle with Krishna. It's different. They'll hug Krishna. The cowherd boys may not be hugging Krishna, at least not in the same way. So it follows perfectly within their relationship, and they don't need rules, because rules are only there to align you with your philosophy or your beliefs, but in the pure state, you're already aligned, so you naturally act properly. Now, in the material world, it's different. We're here because we have forgotten Krishna. So in the spiritual world, everything aligns perfectly, but in the material world, we've forgotten Krishna, and the purpose of this world is to reform us, to bring us back to Krishna. So, in order to reform us, then we want to create and follow a culture that reforms us, and that culture should be a spiritual culture, or that culture should look or resemble, as far as possible, the culture of Krishna's pure devotees, how they act and how they live. But their culture is automatically established. But for us, we have to establish a culture based on the activities of pure devotees, based on pure Krishna consciousness. And therefore, we establish rules and regulations so that by following those rules and regulations, we simulate the culture, at least externally. We're not simulating it spontaneously. We're not simulating it naturally, but we're simulating it through the rules, because the rules govern our actions. But by simulating it, meaning by following the rules reform us. So we end up acting properly, even though internally we're not spontaneously drawn to acting properly. Just like, let's say you're going to go to a formal gathering, and you go to a little class, and you say, and they teach you, in these formal circles, this is how you interact with people. When you meet them, you do this, you say this. You don't do this, you don't say this. When you eat, this is the proper way to eat, this is the proper way to hold the fork and this spoon, so on and so forth. So let's say in this example, it's a very high society situation and you've never been in it. And so you naturally won't act properly in every circumstance, so you need to be trained. where those who are raised in high society, they naturally act that way. They don't need to be trained. So the high society people are like the pure devotees, and the people who are not from high society are like conditioned souls who are taught to act like pure devotees. So it may be awkward for you to hold the fork in this way, put the napkin in this way, put your little pinky out when you drink the tea, and whatever, but that's the culture, so you learn that. And this is how the aristocratic, sophisticated culture people in this society eat. So you learn to follow the rules, and then by following the rules, you basically look like everyone else, but it's not natural for you to do that. But by doing it, it will become natural. So we're learning Krishna's culture, how pure devotees act and interrelate. By doing that, we become purified and it becomes natural. So I'm going to stop and see if you have any questions, or comments, or if there's problems out there. Jai Venurati. Okay. And one brief look at Mayapur TV. Okay. So everyone who's on Mayapur TV is on Krishna.com, all right? So let's go back. If this is not making sense, please ask questions. Krishna's idea is that even if you're not Krishna conscious, you should still follow his culture. Even you may do it for material motives. Now this is interesting. So we're saying here, we're establishing rules, and the rules are based on the activities of pure devotees. So now this seems contradictory, because you're saying even you may do it for material motives. So it needs some explanation. The culture happens naturally in the spiritual realm because of the pure love and pure association. But here it doesn't happen naturally, so we need rules until we have pure love, because it otherwise won't spontaneously manifest. So rules create the form. So what's being said here is, let's say you have the form, okay, in this example, the etiquette. So you hold the teacup with your finger out like this, and then you drink it. And all the cultured people are doing it because it's proper. It's the way it's done. But perhaps you're not doing it because it's the way it's supposed to be done, but you're doing it to be accepted by them because you want to get something from them. And otherwise, you're not going to do this in your own life. So that would be an example of Krishna establishes cultural principles. Well, and in this discussion, we're going to use the principle of respect. So respect is a Vedic cultural principle. But you could use respect to get something you want. I will respect a superior because by doing that, they will fulfill my material desires or my material necessities, or they will reward me with something. But it's a spiritual principle, because we should respect God because he's the greatest, and we're not the greatest. We should respect Guru as a representative of God. That's called humility. But we may use respect to gain something material. So we still follow the culture of respect, but the reason we're doing it is different. But still, because we're within the culture of respect, it's going to help us, and there's a reason. Let me read it and I'll explain it. Krishna takes this spiritual culture and establishes it as codes of conduct. And this is called religion. You know, this is how you act. Here are the rules of Shastra, the principles, and it's called religion, or you can call it Varnashram. Varnashram simply means following proper rules according to your ashram and your varna, your ashram and your work. These codes of conduct are the ways someone who is pure in devotion will act. But since we don't have this, since we're not pure, we don't know how to act. So these codes of conduct are meant for everyone. So those who want to advance spiritually, those who want to advance materially. So at least externally, everyone's acting properly. But even if your motive is material, if you're acting properly, it will actually benefit you, and it's explained here. So there are those who want to follow spiritual culture in the material world, and they do sadhana. They learn the runes and they follow it. And they do it to develop pure devotion, and they understand this is the ultimate purpose. But what about the others? For those who want material advancement, they're advised to follow the same culture. Krishna says there's only one path, and there's one culture for everybody. And the one path is Krishna, and the other, at the end of the path is Krishna, and the bottom is hell, or material life. Pious people who are not trying to get out of the world stay in the middle. So you have Krishna up here, then there's piety in the middle, and there's material or hell, sinful life on the bottom. So if you're acting piously, but your motive is not to get out of the world, you're kind of in the middle. And so you follow these principles, but you follow them for elevation, material elevation. Pious people are not trying to get out of the world. They don't want to use the culture, the rules for Krishna. They want to use it for material benefit. So they're following the same rules, or in this case, we gave the example of respect. So they're respecting others. So the principle is the same, respect, but the detail will differ. So I have to continue reading. It will explain it. The details in the Vedic culture can bring people back to basic Krishna consciousness principles, but in a way that materialists don't know that the rules are essentially spiritual. For example, respect for authority is a Vedic principle. And the idea is that we ultimately learn to respect God, the supreme authority. So this is the point. What's being said here is the general principle is respect. It's a Vedic principle, and it works well if you want to advance spiritually. And the idea is ultimately that we should learn to respect the supreme God. So in Vedic culture, for example, you see people respect demigods, and we'll look at that and say, well, it's not good, they should respect Krishna. That's true, but it's also good that they respect demigods because they know they're not the supreme controller. In Vedic culture, even today you see in India, people respect parents, people respect teachers, people respect authority. That's part of the Vedic culture. The reason that's built into the Vedic culture is because ultimately we're taught or we learn to respect God as the supreme controller, the greatest. But if there's no respect, then the foundations for atheism become quite strong. As you can see in Western culture, especially in America, there's not a lot of respect. There's not as much respect for position, superiority, and parents and so forth as there is in India. And there's also more atheism in America. So as lack of respect increases for authority, you will also see a rise in atheism, because atheism ultimately is a lack of respect for universal authority. And then you see all these philosophies, it's just what you believe it is, it's what you make, life is what you make it, it's totally subjective, there's nothing absolute. So this all stems from disrespect of authority. And so you see that wherever there's culture, there's respect for authority. And wherever there's respect for authority, naturally people are more God conscious. So you see that Vedic culture naturally leads people to be God conscious. Just because the culture ultimately reflects God consciousness, and even if it's not directly reflecting it, if it's just that your motive may not to be God conscious, but you follow the principles of the culture because you accept that the cultural principles are good, then you respect. You naturally will respect authority. And you see, another thing you see is quite often, you even see this in Mexico, if people have the culture of respect, then when they come to Krishna consciousness, they're less inclined to challenge and more inclined to be open, if not accepting and trusting. And I saw that in Mexico. People are very trusting. And I mentioned also, when we served out prasadam, they all waited for me to eat. That's their culture. It's a culture of respect. So naturally, they're more God conscious. It just works that way. It's nice, isn't it? So one thing leads to another. So you can see, even if a person's motive is material, but they follow the cultural principles, then it will be easier for them to be Krishna conscious. And for example, in India, in most cases, or in general, when you're teaching Krishna consciousness, unlike America, you don't so much have to focus on creating people's faith. In America, one of the things that you're doing when you're teaching is building faith and building trust, because people have very little faith and trust. Whereas in India, because of the culture that they live in, they have a lot of faith and trust for the teacher, faith and trust for scripture, faith and trust for God. They may interpret things, but still generally, when you're speaking to Indian people, there is a sense that you don't have to convince them of so many things, that they have the culture in place. So the more people have the culture of respect, the more easier it is for them to understand spiritual knowledge. So it'll make more sense to them. So that, and then as you get into countries where the culture of respect is lacking, or other God-conscious aspects of culture are lacking, you'll find it more difficult to spread Krishna consciousness. And we see that as society is becoming more materialistic, people are becoming less religious. It's just natural. If it's going to become more materialistic, the culture is degrading, it's naturally going to become more materialistic. And it becomes more materialistic means it's less godless. I mean, it's more godless, less God-conscious. And then it becomes more difficult to teach people Krishna consciousness, because they don't have a whole lot of culture. The culture is simply materialism. And now what you see in the world, which is so bad, you see that even older generation people, they understand this, that, the culture, we're losing our culture. And one of the biggest results of losing our culture is extreme amounts of irresponsibility and self-centeredness that we find in the world today. Because in any cultured society, we have respect, you also have service, you have honor to authority. Whereas in Western culture, when I grew up, the whole philosophy was challenge authority. It was not a culture of service to authority. It was a culture of me, this is what I want. It's all about me. So in any cultured society, it's about service. It's not about me. So the more you see society degrading, the more materialistic it becomes. It means it's more about me. What I want is most important, and that's why we see so much divorce, because it's all about me. I'm not happy. What about the kids? What about the husband or the wife? Well, that doesn't really matter. This is about me. I want to be happy. Then there's not even respect for the spouse or the children. This is what's going on. So just checking to see if you're alive and well. Okay, you're still alive and well. So we can continue. Yes? If you don't understand something, please ask. I'm assuming you understand. It's not rocket science. The materialist is not interested in God, he's interested in himself. So he wants to learn something to improve his material position. But to do this, he must be respectful to the teachings and authorities in the field of his study. So for his own gain, he'll be respectful. So this is an interesting point. I think we covered it, but I think it's interesting. So he wants to learn something, or she wants to learn something, to advance materially. So he'll find a teacher and he'll find a set of teachings, and he'll understand, if I want to learn and benefit from these teachings, I have to respect them, I have to have faith, and I have to be respectful of my teacher. So it works materially. So, like we often say, that when things are lined up spiritually, they line themselves up materially. So respect is a spiritual principle, and it helps materially as well. Next, if he becomes qualified to teach, he will get respect. So he likes this, so he thinks, okay, I will respect my teachers, and then if I become a teacher, I'll be respected. And because he wants respect, he thinks, well, this is good. Then I'll get the respect I want. So respect works for him, even though he's not applying it spiritually. The real purpose is not that he gets respect. The real purpose is to respect pure devotees. But if he's within the culture of respect, in the Vedic culture, if he learns this, it's going to move him forward. So it's interesting, when we talk about what is Vedic culture, ultimately anything that moves you closer to Krishna is Vedic culture. Anything that moves you away from Krishna is not Vedic culture. And so we can see that what we're describing here is that these Vedic principles, even if they're used with material motives, still, because the principle is pure, it gradually helps you and moves you closer to Krishna. So if you look at anything and say, is this helpful to my Krishna consciousness or harmful? If it's helpful, it's Vedic. Krishna is the goal of Vedas. Vedascha sarvaraham eva vedyo. Vedanta krit veda videva chaham. Krishna says, by all the Vedas I am to be known. So if anything which helps us know Krishna is Vedic, by that definition. So let's read on. Prabhupada says that when one comes to Raganuga Bhakti, one follows in the footsteps of a particular devotee. So the principle of accepting someone as higher than us is there even in the spiritual realm. This principle eternally exists. So this is very interesting. What does this mean? When all of you are liberated, which I hope will happen in the next few days, and you realize your relationship with Krishna, because you're going to speak, you're going to chant such pure rounds that you're going to be pure, and you're going to understand your relationship with Krishna. So when you come to Raganuga Bhakti, the practice of Raganuga Bhakti or spontaneous devotion takes place when a devotee becomes attracted, you could say uncontrollably attracted, just extremely attracted, spontaneously attracted, to one of the residents of Vrindavan, which means that he becomes attracted to a particular relationship with Krishna. And he wants to have the same kind of feelings towards Krishna that a particular resident of Vrindavan has. So let's say you become attracted to a friendly relationship with Krishna, and the kind of friendship that Sudama has with Krishna, you really relish and want that. So you follow in his footsteps and you learn. But aside from this, you're already following authority, but aside from this, when you go back to Krishna and Krishna's pastimes, you're going to have someone that you work with, some authority. If you don't like authority, don't go back to Godhead, because you're going to have one. You're going to be in a group, and there's going to be someone who's showing you how to serve Krishna. You'll like him, don't worry. He's going to be showing you how to serve Krishna or how to serve Radha. Isn't that cool? But you're going to have authority. So that respect, that relationship of being trained and under the guidance of superior, it's even going to be there in the spiritual world. So it eternally exists. Isn't that interesting? So this principle of respect, it helps elevate us to Krishna consciousness. And it continues even after we are perfected. You like that? Or maybe some of you don't like that. Oh. Okay, Annapurna is having an exam tomorrow. I have to bless her that she gets 100%. I have to tell her I'm going to Russia in June. She doesn't know that. Yeah, we changed plans. I'm going to Russia in June, and she's going to be there. She's a bona fide Siberian. So isn't that interesting that if you don't like authority, whoa, you're going to have a tough eternity, because that's what goes on there. You're going to work in a group under an authority. So, okay, let's read on a little bit. Principle of accepting someone as higher than us is there even in the spiritual realm. There's always, so you always have your spiritual master, you have your spiritual masters in the spiritual world, quote unquote, those who guide you. There's always Krishna. Of course, you may have a friendly relationship with Krishna and fight with him as a superior friend, but still within the group, you have to learn how to do that in a way that pleases Krishna. So that's there. So let's read on. Vedic literature has been approved by our acharyas. So, like, Vedic literature is vast. So this next section kind of narrows down what is Vedic a little more clearly. We are Rupa Nugas, followers of Rupa Goswami. So what Rupa Goswami has done is he's gone through the Shastra and he's chosen what's important for us. And then he showed us, okay, what's the purpose of this and how do you apply it? So it's Nana Shastra Vichara Naika Nipano. He's gone through all the Shastras. So you have all these Shastras. Okay, so what's important for us? And that creates our Vaishnava culture. And then what did Sanatana Goswami, his brother, do? So Rupa Goswami, he takes from the Shastra what's important, why it's important, how we apply it. And then Sanatana Goswami creates rituals to go along with them. For example, what does that mean? He creates rituals. The principle, Rupa Goswami says, okay, here's a principle that when you chant the holy name, you should chant a regulated amount of rounds, right? But he doesn't say how many. He doesn't show you how to hold the beads, how to use a bead bag, that you don't cross the Krishna bead. So he tells you the purpose of chanting is to develop love of Krishna. And he tells you this is the mood, how you chant. And then Sanatan fills in all the details, hold the beads this way and like that. So then you have really minute details, general purposes, and overall principles. That interesting? You understand? So they've gone through all the scriptures, they have chosen what we follow. So when we mean Vedic culture, we mean the culture that Krishna gives us, that has been approved by our acharyas. Isn't that nice? So this is what the acharyas have given us, so that's what we follow. So we don't follow the whole Vedic paradigm, but this is what the acharyas have given us, and then we follow that. Okay, so is chanting Hare Krishna Vedic, part of Vedic culture? For us it is, because that's what we've been given. The four regulative principles, so on. This is Vedic culture. What we've been given, this is our Vedic culture. And so another definition is, well, Vedic culture means you're following the laws of God. But Rupa Goswami has chosen the particular practices and principles that we follow. But still, to be dharmic means to be Vedic. To follow Krishna's instructions in the Gita, that means to be Vedic. Yes? So, Pankashore Wasikantapa are getting ready to leave Mexico. Okay, tell them to have a good trip. They have this really nice bus marina, and they're driving to California. It's a small bus. Well, some are going to Houston. Right, anyway, it's a Vedic bus, because they're using it for Krishna. It's very Vedic. A Vedic Ford or something. Right? Okay. The Vedic culture is eternal. So, now here's an important point. So it's not that it only worked 5,000 years ago, or it only worked when Lord Chaitanya was here. So, but what the acharyas do is they get rid of everything extraneous. And what does extraneous mean? So there's so much in scripture that's not for bhaktas. It's for karma yogis, jnana yogis, ashtanga yogis. You know. So they get that out of the way, and the scriptures they give us are called the bhakti shastras, because it's just about bhakti. And so there's all these other rules that are part of Vedic culture, but we don't need them, so they eliminate them because it doesn't directly connect with our bhakti. So in their books, like Rupa Goswami's books, Sanatana Goswami's books, they just give us the principles, the details, and the rituals for pure devotional service. Whereas the Vedas, it's just very broad. But culturally, still, things are very similar, even with Mayavadis. There is a culture there. Chanting the holy name, respecting the Murti, respecting Tulsi, all these things. So one time Prabhupada said, somebody asked Prabhupada an interesting question. He said, well, is it better to be a Christian? Sorry about that. Is it better to be a Christian, or is it better to be a demigod worshiper? It's an interesting question, because Christians worship one God, and we know what demigod worship is all about, and Krishna does not approve of or recommend demigod worship. And Prabhupada said it's better to be a demigod worshiper. And so, wow, why would he say that? That's a shock. Are you all shocked? Ooh. Did you fall over like you were just knocked down by a storm? Wow. The reason Prabhupada said that is for the very, very discussion we're having here. He said, because you're within a culture that will elevate you to, ultimately, if you stay within the culture, it can elevate you to the highest platform of Krishna consciousness. Because naturally, within the Vedic culture, as we said, there's respect for guru, for teacher, for Tulsi, for the Murti, for the Shastra, for the parents. And so when you're in that culture, you have more faith in hearing discussions on topics, on spiritual topics. Even you may be materially motivated, but you naturally have faith. Whereas what we see in the world with the so-called Christians, many of them are extremely critical of us. They don't have faith in Krishna. They don't have faith in the Gita. Right? They don't have faith they don't worship Tulsi. They don't have faith in Vaishnavas. They don't have faith in Prasadam. Mahaprasade Govinde. The Mahaprasad of Govinda. Nama Brahmani Vaishnave. The Nama Brahmani, the holy name, the Vaishnavas. Swalpa Punya Avato Rajan. Those who don't have much piety. Swalpa Punya Avato Rajan. Vishvaso Navajayate. The faith in those things never develops. So because of lack of piety, anyone who lacks piety does not have faith in the Mahaprasad, the holy name of Vishnu, the Vaishnavas, Mahaprasade Govinde, Nama Brahmani. Yeah. So that's why Prabhupada said if they're in the Vedic culture, they're better off, because you have faith. They're in the system, it moves them forward. And one of the interesting things we see in the world today, I can speak from experience. Mauritius, the island of Mauritius, I think devotees may have first gone there in the early 70s, 72, 73, 74 at the latest, right? And that island is predominated by the worship of Lord Shiva. And there was very, very little worship of Radha and Krishna. So most families were not worshippers of Radha and Krishna. They were worshippers of Shiva. And there are Shiva temples everywhere. Call them Shivalas. That are established by the government. So everywhere you go on the island, every 5-10 miles, there's another Shivala, a temple. I mean, it's nice for us because we could do programs there, but it both indicates that people in that country are Shiva Bhaktas, and it keeps the Shiva Bhakta going. It keeps the disciplic succession going of Shiva Bhaktas, but today there's so many people are worshipping Radha and Krishna. Why? Because of ISKCON, because of our preaching. So the people are Hindus, they have faith, so the sadhus come, they listen to the sadhus say you should chant Hare Krishna. Krishna says, surrender to me, worship me, Shiva is a Krishna Bhakta, and then they change because they're within that culture. So that's a practical example. But in Mauritius, the very, very few Christians became devotees. I'm only aware of maybe 2 or 3 or 4, maybe 5. There's thousands of devotees. And of the thousands, at least 1,000 or more, maybe 5 Christians became devotees. So that makes the point. Interesting, isn't it? Yes. Okay. And we'll continue reading. So when Prabhupada says Vedic culture, he means the culture he's giving us in his books. Interesting point. So what do we mean by Vedic culture? Okay, read Prabhupada's books, what he's teaching in his books. As we apply those teachings in our life, we call that Vedic culture. Now, you may say, well, there are not so many details in Prabhupada's books. Cultural details. That's true, but there are principles there. And if you look at the principles, you will see, you will begin to understand the culture. Yet, at the same time, the culture comes out through the stories. So, if we say, I don't see the culture there, it may be that we're not looking for it, or we don't know how to look for it. But if you look through the stories, then you see how people interact with one another and how things are organized and set up. And then you see the culture. And many of us, when we read the Bhagavatam or we read the stories of Mahabharata, Ramayana, we don't pick up on the cultural aspects, but they're actually there. How kings dealt with their subjects, how kings dealt with one another, how kings dealt with their wives, how they dealt with their brothers, how they dealt with their parents. It's all there in the stories. You just have to look for it, and you'll see, okay, here is culture. Like, what is culture? Well, another aspect you find in Chaitanya Charitamrita, especially see the culture of Vaishnava relationships where they're very loving, very affectionate. That's culture. A lot of times we say, and it's true, that when devotees don't get along, it means, or often means, they're still on the Kanishta platform, which is the lowest stage of devotional service. And so, on the lower stages of devotional service, the culture is of worshiping God, but not respecting devotees properly. Or sometimes we might say, well, it's the culture of bhakti, but it's being manifest through the modes of nature, like passion or ignorance. So then you can also understand when culture is not being properly executed, when it doesn't match up to the culture that we see in Prabhupada's books, at least in the stories that he's giving us through the books. Because a lot of times when we do devotional service, at least what I observe is that externally we do it, but we may not understand the culture internally, so then we don't deal properly with one another. We deal through the culture that we grew up with. That's the culture we know. So we maybe in America we say when somebody is not so refined, we say he's rough around the edges. So American culture is quite rough around the edges compared to Vedic culture. Vedic culture is it's very refined because there's a high degree of respect for the individual, respect for animals, respect for God, respect for holy places. And American culture is very rough because it's more of a find your own way culture. I want to do it my way. I don't want to be told how to do it. That's not really culture. I mean, you can call it culture. Like there's a joke in Australia. The only culture in Australia is in the yogurt culture. So, you know, the idea that I will do it because it feels good. You could say that's the culture, but it's not actually culture. Culture means there's some authority. Like Mahatma Gandhi was asked, what do you think about Western culture? And then he said, well, I think that would be a good idea. So it was a funny and polite way of saying that actually you don't have culture. And another way of looking at culture is to say, culture makes someone human. And Prabhupada said, we are making animals humans. And he said, then he further said, perhaps we are the only movement, or the first time in history that this attempt is being made. And it's a really powerful statement if you think about it. We are making animals into human beings. What does that mean? Is my professor an animal? Well, he's a cultured man. He's a learned scholar. But as we said originally, culture means adapting principles into one's actions, alignment of higher spiritual principles. So if you look at the actions of many people, you will see, as Shastra says, very much on par with the actions of animals. Humans have the ability to intellectualize these things. So we think, because we can intellectualize it, it's culture. But, for example, you have, I think they call them sexologists or sexual therapists. And a sexual therapist, I don't really know much about them. I've stumbled across them on the internet by accident. I find them quite, how should I say it politely? Repulsive. Yeah, I can't say it any other way. Ridiculous. Why ridiculous? Because Prabhupada said, do the animals need education in how to do sex? But now here we have this, sexologists, sexual education, how to enjoy sex, great scholars talking about how to enjoy sex. So, is this culture? No, it's not culture. So culture means human life, where you get from animal life to human life, then you can actually call it culture. So that's Varnashram. Shudra, that's culture, but outside of that, we wouldn't really consider it culture. You consider it malecha, which malecha means it's outside of Vedic culture. So outside of Vedic culture, it's not culture. Now you might say, what about American culture? What about European culture? Are there, and look at India today. India, I just read there's like almost 3 million prostitutes in India. 35% of those prostitutes became prostitutes before they were 18. I mean, it's horrible. Child prostitution is rampant in India. There's so many problems in India, and are we to say that we want to follow this culture? No, we don't say that. We only say that we would follow aspects of Indian culture that are part of Vedic culture or reflect Vaishnava culture. Yes, and there's very much of that in India, as much as there's not that. And is everything in American culture bad? No, there are many good aspects of American culture. We accept those. They have connection with God. They have high principles of morality in many aspects of American culture. So we accept anything that's favorable, that's useful. We don't reject it because it's not quote-unquote Vedic, but by engaging in Krishna service it becomes Vedic. But there are some things you can't engage because they're just beyond human sanity. So that's my 2 cents on American culture. And Prabhupada liked America very much. And he said America was very good to me. They gave me money, they gave me men, so many things. He said, I love America. So it wasn't that Prabhupada was just coming and putting America down. He didn't do that. Prabhupada put down the activities of human beings that are animalistic. So where we see that, he put it down. He put down animal killing. It's not the activity of human beings. It doesn't mean that everything that Americans do is bad. But as a culture, it needs some more work, you could say, to get it back into the human form of life. I don't know what it says. I have a question. Sometimes I have to leave. I mean, sometimes you have to go somewhere. But I want to offer incense or flower to Krishna. So I just offer to all in the altar together, not one by one. Isn't it offensive? No, it's better than nothing. There's a proper way to do arti. So really what you're describing here is you're not really doing arti. It's just offering. So okay, so you offer. That's fine. But if you have deities or you have pictures and you want to worship them properly, then you offer proper arti. But at least you offer something. So what you're describing is like you're offering something unofficial. If that's all you can do, or that's all you know how to do, then it's okay. But a more standardized form of deity worship is better. Okay, so we have 4 minutes. Does anyone want to ask a question or want clarity on what we're talking about? Culture means rules. Rules within Vedic culture will always lead us to a higher consciousness of respect. You know, okay, let me say it this way. I'm a little tired. I've been up since 12:30. How can I say this? A lot of times in Krishna consciousness, we understand philosophy. It's very clear. We know what the philosophy is and we know what we should do. But we don't have the cultural context. So I'm giving a class later, and the verse is about sex, and every verse before it, for I don't know how long, has been about sex. And it's a really interesting subject to study from a cultural perspective, because cultural norms and views of sex in the West, especially in the last 50 years, have drastically changed. And it affects the way we understand what Prabhupada teaches and Shastra teaches about sex, because when you're raised with a cultural view of sex as we are now in the Western world, and then you read about what Prabhupada says about sex, a lot of it doesn't make sense at all. Or you look at it and say, this is just causes me to be repressed and guilty, and this can't, these are weird rules nobody can follow. But in a historical, sociological context, you find that, no, these are rules that everybody followed. This was like normal. Nobody thought it was weird. You have one wife and one husband. What's weird about that? You don't get divorced. You have sex to have children. If you don't want children, don't have sex. That was just, people just understood that. That was just like normal. And now, in our culture, you read that and you go, no, this is wrong, this is Victorian, this is, you know, restricting our freedom and so forth, and this is backwards, this is archaic. And it's interesting that if you read, I don't know if you want to read, but if you read anything online written by people who have left ISKCON, who have left ISKCON meaning voluntarily, not like they just had spiritual trouble, but they're, you know, they still want to be devotees. But people actually left and rejected it, you'll always see this sexual thing coming up. They'll always complain about the sexual standards and how they were repressed, restricted, and it's all a reflection of modern Western views. If you just study history, people didn't think that way. People, you know, it's like, you know, restricted, you know, these people who are complaining were brahmacharis, they were single men, and they're complaining about being sexually restricted. In every sane culture of the world, single men restrict their sex life. You see what I'm saying? So a lot of times we're looking at philosophy, but we don't understand the cultural context in which it comes, and then we look at through our own cultural context of how we're raised, and we don't understand the principle. We misunderstand it. We understand, I think we can speak about the philosophy, but really understanding the practicality of it, the culture, and as we say, the practical application is culture. We don't understand it because we're looking at it through the wrong cultural context. So it's important when we're studying Prabhupada's books to try to look at things through the Vedic cultural context and how that culture would be applicable, you know, the principles of it, and how it would apply today. Another thing that I've mentioned before, which is quite interesting, is that, as you know, as many of you know, in ISKCON, women are not always as respected as we would hope they would be. And that comes out in some negative ways in relationships, particularly in marriage. And we've heard classes which have been a little bit derogatory sometimes. Of course, I'm being mild here. Not just a little bit derogatory. They sometimes have been very derogatory towards women. But if you look at it from a cultural perspective, what's the you know, okay, you have a philosophical perspective, women are this, women are that. But now, if you just look at it from a cultural perspective, what will you see? A mother is one's first guru. Women are to be respected wherever the women are respected. All the gods live. Chanakya says women are more cunning than men, which means they're smarter. Women should be protected. What does that mean? It means you fight with them? It means you tell them what to do. I'm the boss, you do what I say. It doesn't mean that. Those are our Western, or whatever, they've come from cultural ideas. But if you look solely within the whole philosophy of sex from a cultural perspective, you don't see all these things that are often preached in our movement. It's interesting. And so, therefore, we can assume, at least to some degree, that when you read philosophy and then you kind of give this very narrow presentation of this is how it is and it is no other way, it's been divorced from its cultural context. And when people hear it, often it doesn't make them feel, they feel bad. It doesn't feel right to them. They go, no, it can't be like this. Krishna consciousness this doesn't feel like Krishna consciousness. Now, what you said, I see as our philosophy, but within the context of your explanation, this doesn't seem correct. And a lot of people have that experience where you're hearing class and you say, what you're saying is right, but it doesn't feel right. There's something missing, and it's because it doesn't have the broad cultural context to it. It comes more from one's former cultural context, or it's a very narrow understanding, which may not be one's former cultural context, but it just may simply be a lack of cultural context from which the philosophy came from. I hope that makes sense. Okay. Dustin is asking, can bhakti exist without Vedic culture? No, because, see, the thing is, how do you define culture? Right? What is culture? Yeah, I mean, we can't exist without culture. So, I would say, if we define culture as a lifestyle, then bhakti is a lifestyle. And so then you're saying, well, then to answer your question, you'd have to say, well, we have to define what is Vedic culture. Now, it's a broad discussion because you could say, well, is this Vedic? Is this Vedic? You could say, well, it is Vedic because it comes from the Vedas and their shlokas. Yeah, so intrinsically it's Vedic. Is this Vedic? Well, intrinsically it's not Vedic. It just carries a tape recorder. But because I use the tape recorder to record my classes, and hopefully I speak from the Vedas, then this becomes Vedic. So intrinsically there are things which are of sattva gun, and I would say another definition of Vedic, which might be more helpful for our spiritual life, is it sattvic? Like you have food which is sattvic, and you have food which is passionate, and food which is in ignorance. And of course you say, well, we offer to Krishna, so it becomes prasadam, so it's all Vedic. But intrinsically, if something's sattvic, that's what we want, because it helps us. And so Bhagavatam says, you can do devotional service in ignorance. So you think, well, devotional service should be Vedic, but intrinsically, the way you're doing it or the mentality you have could be ignorance. Kind of complicates your question a little bit, but if we are to simplify it, then I think we should say, is it helping you become Krishna conscious? And are you able to use it for Krishna? And some things could be better used for Krishna, or some things will be more pleasing to Krishna. Right? You say, well, is this Vedic? Well, I used it for Krishna, so it's Vedic in a broad sense. But is it pleasing? Is it most pleasing to Krishna the way you did it? Is this the way Krishna likes it? And then is it sattvic? Is it more sattvic or more tamasic or rajasic? And I would say you could say it's more Vedic, quote unquote, if it's sattvic, because it's closer to what Krishna's culture is sattvic. It's actually a very broad question for which we could have lots of discussion, and I don't want to say I'm an expert in any way, but as a broad definition, anything you can connect to Krishna is in the broadest sense Vedic. And there's some things you can't connect to Krishna. They're just grossly ignorant. They don't have any place in devotional service. And some things are naturally just Krishna likes them. If they're just sattvic or Vedic or whatever you want to call them, it's just the way Krishna likes it. And so they're intrinsically Vedic. Someone might disagree with that, but if you look in our shastras, look at how deity worship is done. You can't, there are shastras. This is how it's done. There's a standard of purity. That's the Vedic standard of purity. You have to bathe before you go on the altar. You have to wear clean clothes. They can't be clothes made out of impure materials. They can't go in the bathroom. That's just the Vedic standard of purity. You can't say, well, because I wear my clothes on the altar, and I'm wearing them for Krishna, then it's Vedic. No, by the standards of purity, they're dirty. Your clothes are dirty. And so, you know what I'm saying? So there are absolute, by Vedic standards of our Shastra, there are certain absolutes which we could just determine that ritually, this is not considered pure. It might be considered pure because there are no spots on it, but ritually it's impure because it's been touched by bodily secretions, it's been in the bathroom, you've eaten in it, it's all impure. That means your cloth becomes impure and you can't go on the altar with such impure cloth. And that's Vedic, it's just the way it is. You can't get around that. So, is Vedic culture intrinsic to the practice of bhakti? Yes and no, because you could play a guitar and do kirtan. So is the guitar Vedic? No, It's not. It have its origins and maybe it comes from the sitar, yeah. But then you play it for Krishna, so now in a broader sense it's Vedic. But mridanga, that's, a traditional instrument for kirtan. Do you have to use it? No. You have kirtan without it? Yes. Are there other drums that can be used? Yes. Is it intrinsic to the practice of bhakti? Yes. Can you go back to Godhead if you don't play mridanga in kirtan? Yes. But you see, so some things are, it's part of the paraphernalia of Mahaprabhu. Kartals, mridanga. Now, some people don't play kartals and mridanga too well. It sounds like a building is being knocked down the way they play. And so it doesn't authorize or allow that kartals and mridanga be played that way, and we call that Vedic. That's just, I would say, that's just passion or ignorance. So you can use something which is intrinsically used in devotional service. Pure ghee, pure cow's milk. Krishna likes that. You could mess it up the way you cook with it, or that milk could be like full of junk. And you may not want to use that for Krishna. So your mridanga and kartals could sound like a destruction of the universe. And that's not pleasing to Krishna. Although inherently, the instruments are pleasing to Krishna. The person who's using them is not using it in a way that's pleasing to Krishna, which I think has just really nuanced this argument to unlimited complexity. And covered my bases also by being so ambiguous that nobody could really argue with me, because I kind of stretched it all around, Anuradha said, I had a spiritual master who didn't teach me about culture, and I thought it was okay. But when you teach us all about the Vedic culture, I realize how important it is, because it helps you a lot to develop love for Krishna. Yeah, culture is, it's just, I'll make this point again. Try to understand the cultural context when you study stories, and you'll see, like if you live in India, you see certain aspects of culture that you understand are higher and are helpful for bhakti. You see like this extreme level of faith, trust, and respect for elders, and how that plays into a relationship, how it helps and enhances one's bhakti in terms of their submission to authority, to their guru, to working together well. And you also see a lot of times within this environment, you see how we bring in a lot of our cultural conditioning that doesn't really fit into Krishna consciousness. So you have to be aware of that. Alaksha has a question. Talking about preaching, as I understand, we must understand principles and details in order to advance gradually into a Vedic culture, considering chanting Hare Krishna, following 4 principles as most important principles. Then accept the spiritual master. Then we can accept other principles and even details. Yes. Yeah. So this is, there's certain things that are absolute. Accepting your guru, chanting your rounds, 4 regular principles like that. Those things you can't adjust. Now, if you get up at 4, 4:30, 3 o'clock, you wear a red sari, a white sari, a red skirt, a white skirt. These things are less important. But one of the principles, or the main principle of bhakti, is you do things to please Guru and Krishna, right? So, devotee says, well, is it okay to dress this way or that way? And so the principle is, well, what will please Krishna? What will please Guru? What's that's the ultimate question. And, is it Vedic? Well, it's Vedic to please Guru and Krishna. So, bhakti is all about pleasing authorities. I mean, even beyond what's culturally correct, does this please Krishna? And does this please Prabhupada? Does this please my Guru? Because that's the essence of Vedic culture, right? And so you might say, well, my Guru likes this. And someone may say, well, that's not Vedic, Prabhu. No. But he likes it, so I give it to him. And that's Vedic, that you're pleasing your Guru. So, did that answer your question, or did I skip around? Well, like, chanting Hare Krishna 16 rounds. That's a practice. Kirtan is a practice. How you do kirtan, the melody with which you do it, where you do it, those are all details. Who leads the kirtan? The principle is to chant the holy names. You could chant it in the, like Allen Ginsberg came to America. And he had a melody and nobody knew the melody. And they were saying, can't you chant in Prabhupada's melody? And he said, well, I don't know that melody. And Prabhupada wanted him to lead kirtan because he was so popular. And if he led kirtan, then all these people would chant. Actually, they had a kirtan in 1969, May of 1969, at Ohio State University. I think it's called Ohio State, in Columbus, Ohio. 2,000 students came. Allen Ginsberg was there leading the kirtan, so he attracts a lot of people. And he chanted his melody, because he told Prabhupada, that's the melody I chant. I don't know the other melodies. So Prabhupada said, chant in the melody of your country. So you may say, well, Rag is more Vedic. Okay, maybe it is. And you're chanting a Beatles melody to kirtan. Yeah, all right. So, intrinsically you might say that the Rag has more sattva to it and your Beatles melody has more rajas to it. Could be. But it doesn't always mean that people will be affected necessarily by the rajas and tamas of the melody. Because it depends on the culture. Maybe if the Rag is too esoteric, people can't even sing it. So maybe it has more sattva to it, but nobody can sing it. Because it's so... And you just chant Hare Krishna to Yellow Submarine. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. And everybody can sing along. So, what to do? You've got more people to sing. You're chanting Hare Krishna too. We all live in a yellow submarine, yellow submarine, yellow submarine. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Or however that melody goes. It was a long time ago. I don't know if I answered your question. I don't even know if what I said makes sense. Does it make sense to anybody? Maybe we'll all have to listen to this again. It's such an interesting subject. Prabhupada came to the West, and he liked brahmacharis to shave up. Surrender, shave your head. Did he force them to live in the temples, put on dhotis and shave their head? No. Did he like it? Yes. If that's what they were going to do, yeah, live like a brahmachari, why not? Was he okay when we went on book distribution and we didn't wear dhoti? Yes, as long as Prabhupada's just concern is that we weren't reverting to our old ways. So, bhakti, everything's about the heart, but I can only speak through my experience, and that there are things inherent within a culture, within India, which are reflections of Vedic culture, which are very uplifting and very helpful for our spiritual practice. And that's why Prabhupada wanted us to live in India, because you can see in how people relate, you can see how things are done with the culture. It's just like, for example, a very simple thing, Anuradha, Alaksha, and others. Very simple. And I've mentioned this before. In India, they have shoe racks. And where possible, they have water faucets near the shoe racks. The reason being, when you take your shoe off and you touch it and you put it on the rack, your hand is considered contaminated because you've touched your shoe, and therefore there's water and you should wash your hand. Now in the West, you will notice most likely that when devotees touch their shoes, they don't wash their hand because they don't know that. They don't understand that when you touch your shoe, your hands are dirty. Or sometimes they'll touch their mouth. They may not always know they should wash their hand. Because in Western culture, what's the problem of touching your shoe or picking your nose or putting your hand in your mouth? Maybe putting your hand in your mouth is not polite. Or putting your hand in your ear wearing your clothes in the bathroom, what is wrong with that? You guys are crazy. You have to wash your clothes before you go on the altar. If you wear them in the bathroom, you have to wash your hands. You just sneezed, you have to wash your hands when you're in the kitchen. You touched your ear, you have to wash your hands when you're in the kitchen. So when you're in India, even if you do deity worship, you learn these things. So, yes, you understand that there are, in India you learn there are certain standards. For example, when you go to the home of an Indian, the whole universe stops and they wait on you hand and foot. That's just what they do. I've been in the homes of some of my friends and they forgot to feed me. As funny as it sounds to an Indian who could never imagine, because the Indians, they go out of their way to feed you 3 meals a day. They give you gifts when you leave. It's amazing to watch it. That's culture. That's Vedic culture. That it's all based around respect. You see in the West, one of the things I notice most in the West is lack of respect. As I said when we were taking prasadam in Mexico at a public program with non-devotees, they waited because I was the teacher. They waited for me to start eating, or they asked, "Can I start?" That's just the culture. Do they do that in America? Of course not. Devotees don't even do that often. Our second generation, they are unfortunately not trained in these aspects of etiquette. We're just growing up in India, in a nice Indian family. You learn things that even our second generation raised in Gurukul hasn't learned. It's interesting. Another phenomena that happens, really interesting. In Mauritius, the children are very Krishna conscious because of the culture. They're very close to their families. It's changing now, but they're very close to their families. And in Mauritius, they never had a Gurukul system, and they never needed one, because the family unit is very tight, and the culture of the country still has the Vedic influences. Whereas, this is my observation, that the children there were more Krishna conscious, even going to public school, than our kids going to our Gurukul, because the American culture is lacking in many ways. So even the kids go to the Gurukul, but when they're living in the West, there's a lot of cultural aspects they don't get that kids living in other countries get, even though they're going to non-devotee schools. Quite interesting, don't you think? That was an interesting observation that I made. So, I think we should end here. What do you think? We've gone over time.